Good morning or good afternoon or good late morning to everybody to our second session of this Haftorah share. It's nice to see people who have returned, and it looks like there's some new folks or new old folks, people I know from a long time ago among the attendees. So welcome to everybody. Let's jump right in. A brief review of what we talked about last time and a sort of segue into today, but mostly we'll focus today, as I mentioned, on the Haftorah of Parashat Vayera, which we will study in earnest. So for those who were not here last time, for those who were here last time, let's review. We spoke last time about introduction to the very institution of the Haftorah, which is clouded a bit in historical mystery. There are some origin stories in our tradition, but we don't know for sure when and why it was started, though we do have early testimony, to the institution in the New Testament, as well as already by the Mishnah, the Tosefta, Braitot, and the Bavli, already know of the institution of Haftorah, are already determining which certain Haftorot which will be read on specific days, though without deciding or I guess determining that there would be a specific Haftorah for each Parsha. That's a later development. And there are many traditions as to which Haftorah is read for each Parsha. This year is mostly, our conversations are mostly focused on the Ashkenazic, or what's become the standardized Ashkenazic tradition, only because that's the one I'm most familiar with. Although today we'll have opportunity to contrast the Ashkenazic tradition with the or a Sephardic tradition of reading the Haftorah. There's a difference there, with regards to today's, this week's Haftorah. At the end of last week, after a sort of lengthy introduction, we started noting different sorts of linkages between the Haftorah and the Parsha. Sometimes they are thematic, sometimes they appear to be merely technical or lexical based on a given phrase. Ki mei Noach zot, like the Haftorah for Parsha Noach mentions the waters of Noach explicitly, but we posited or challenged ourselves as readers to look for more thematic, deeper connections between the Haftorah and the Parsha. So, for example, we looked at the Haftorah for Parsha Bereshit, which is from Isaiah, like many are from. Many Haftorah, a disproportionate number of Haftorah are taken from the book of Isaiah. And we noted I won't reiterate or go over it again, but we noted some obvious linkages between Parsha Bereshit and the Haftorah for Parsha Bereshit, taken from Isaiah 42, and then we tried to posit that there were actually deeper connections between Bereshit and this Haftorah. Even the one for Noach, which is also taken from Isaiah, and it's read for Parsha Noach, and also other times during the year, Isaiah 54, Rani Akara Lo Yalada. So again, it does the prophet there does mention Noach explicitly, right? When God, speaking through the prophet, promises to comfort Zion, comfort Israel, and says, Ki mei Noach zot li, asher nishbati me'avor mei Noach od al haaretz. This is from Isaiah 54. Kein nishbati miksof alayach u'migarabach. The God says, this is like, or this is analogous to, this is to me the waters of Noah. When I speak now, just as I swore that I would never pass the waters of Noah over the earth again, so too, Kein nishbati, so too I'm swearing from getting angry at you again, from despising you, because my covenant with you will never be shaken. Shlomi lo tamut amar merachamecha Adonai. And the Haftorah goes on, but that's like one explicit linkage. You could argue that was all there was to it. They needed a Haftorah, and they chose one that mentioned the waters of Noah explicitly. However, there might be more to it than meets the eye. Just two examples. The Haftorah, before I go on, I should say that even that linkage, even if you stop there, Sorry, I see a question in the chat. Does Israel uses Haftorah at the same time as the U.S.? Yeah, I mean, Haftorah, the Parashah themselves are not always exactly lined up, but generally speaking, yeah, they are the same Haftorah per tradition. That's to say, Ashkenazic and Sephardic, and Edot Mizrach, and Spanish, Portuguese, and et cetera, et cetera. So the very analogy which the prophet himself draws between May Noach and the contemporaneous events in Israel at the time already invite one to overlay the story of the flood onto the story of the Chorban, onto the story of the destruction. And once you establish a linkage like that, as to say, with the arrow going from the story of Noah onto the story of the destruction of the first temple, and bringing all of the motifs and resonances in that direction, willy-nilly, you end up inviting the reader to turn the arrow the other way and to read the story of the Chorban onto the story of Noah. So, for example, perhaps one can imagine, I forget where I saw this, one can imagine these words being spoken to Noah as he emerges from the ark and from the experience of the flood. And we don't really have opportunity to get into Noah's head at that point, or his heart. What is he experiencing as he emerges into a world destroyed and potentially about to be rebuilt? What is he experiencing? What does he need to hear? Perhaps he would hear similar words as the prophet is articulating here. I mean, indeed, the Haftorah there goes on to say, Aniyah, the way we read it, the Ashkenazim read it. Sephardim actually stop a little earlier, but the Ashkenazim then go on to say, Aniyah Soara Lo Nuchama, speaking of the one who is not comforted. God says, I will comfort you. Lo Nuchama, the one who is not comforted, is indeed connected very much to the Noah story, right? God has regrets for having created the world, but God also, when Noah himself is named, right, they say, this person, this one will bring us comfort. So they do the next connection between Noah and comfort is already embedded into the etymology of his name. And of course, there's a reason that these Haftorah are read during the Shiva de Nechemta, during the 7 Haftorot of Nechama, of consolation, leading after Tisha B'Av in our custom. So there's already there another linkage to the Noach story, and again, it's deeper than merely, or potentially deeper than merely just May Noach Zotli. It just sounds like a quick quick lexical connection. I want to add another one, which I think I want to come back to later. I saw somewhere the following theory, and I don't know if this theory, what exactly how to evaluate it. I heard the other week I had the opportunity here in Israel to visit Yeshivat Risha. Yeshivat Risha is a yeshiva for women here in Israel. It's 5 or 6 years old and is now bursting out of its Beit Midrash. Thank God. They had to take the bookshelves out of the Beit Midrash to make more room for more students. So that bodes well. It was very exciting for me to actually get there in person. If you're ever in Israel and you haven't been there yet, you must let me know. We must make an arrangement for you to come visit. It's really, really amazing place. But I happened to be there visiting, and I heard a Shiur Klali from Rabbi Avi Wolfish, who also is teaching for Drisha this semester on Mishnah. He's one of the world's leading scholars of Mishnah studies. Anyway, so he said, that he used to have a teacher himself who would say about a given reading, about a given drasha, he would say, there are some readings which are nice, and there are some readings which are true. And there are some readings which are both, and I suppose he didn't say this, I suppose there are some which are neither. So what I'm about to cite for you, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's nice. And that is that someone made the claim or the hypothesis that one of the functions or the effects of the Haftorah, besides reflecting back on the Kriyat Torah, on the Parsha just read, is to act as a segue leading into the next Parsha. That's to say, a segue from the Parsha we just read to next week's Parsha. Because it's true, actually. That's actually how it's set up. You read Parsha, let's say you read Parsha Noach, and then you read the Haftorah, and the next thing you're going to read publicly, Shabbat Mincha, and then during the week, and then next Shabbat is Parashat Lech Lecha, is the next Parasha. So the Haftorah is sandwiched in between. So this person made the claim that maybe the Haftorah acts as a segue. In the case of Parashat Noach, between the two Parashiyot, in the case of Parashat Noach, we read the Noach, and then we read Rania Kara Lo Yalada Pitzchi Rina V'Tzahali. Sing out, rejoice, you barren woman who has not given birth. Meaning here, speaking metaphorically of Israel, right? The barren one who will have children, right? Who will be redeemed. If you think about in the context of Parashah Bereshit, the end of Sefer Bereshit, the end of Noach into Lech Lecha, then you realize all of a sudden, Noah until Noach, inclusive of Noach, all the begats, right? Everyone seems to be having children without any problem. It seems like a totally not only natural but almost automatic. Feature of life. You live and you're born, you live, you have children, you pass away, in the next generation, so too. You don't encounter the very important biblical, today as well, but in the Bible, biblical phenomenon of the akara of one who is barren until you get into Parshat Noah, Lech Lecha, or I really should say the end of Noach, where we meet the character of Sarai. The end of Noach, chapter 11, Vatihi Sarai Akara in Lavalad. Sarai is barren; she has no children. That becomes very important because of because for the narrative itself, including into Parashat Vayera with the birth of Isaac. So perhaps you have Torah, Rani Akara Lo Yalada, rejoice, O Akara, already acts as a segue and hints to the listeners, to the readers, that till now we've had all these begats. At the end of Noach we meet Sarai, and that is going to become very important, that this akara will rejoice. That's a very interesting sort of hypothesis. I want to come back. I don't know if it's true, but it's I like it. I enjoy it, and I'm going to try to see if we can use it to help us understand the Haftorah of Vayera as well. Okay. Let me pause. I see in the chat, didn't the giant Og also survive the flood? He wrote Oz, which reminds me of Oz, who was a political candidate who did not survive, as I understand, or did not just make the cut. But Og, according to Midrash, did survive, right? That is a Midrash. I'm losing Jennifer. You can feel free to. I'm losing, in what reference to what you made that comment. So feel free to jump in. While we're doing that, anybody else, anything when they want to say? Okay, so let's jump into, and Jennifer, feel free. Let's jump into the Haftorah for Parashat Vayera. I don't have a source sheet today, and in general, I'm not going to rely less on source sheets than we did the first time, but I'm going to screen share, if you'd like, from the Haftorah, which is if you have a Tanakh or some other way of accessing in a print, in hard copy, or on your own. The Haftorah for Parashat Vayera is from the book of Kings 2, 2 Kings, Malachim Bet, chapter 4. And it's taken from the narratives, the stories of the prophet Elisha. The prophet Elisha is a Talmud Muvhak, is a primary student, the primary student of Eliyahu Hanavi, none other than Elijah the prophet. And actually his stories in this Haftorah, I don't know if we're going to talk about it that much here, but themselves echo the stories of his master teacher, Eliyahu Hanavi. So we're in 2 Kings chapter 4. And I will screen share, but what I'm actually going to suggest is, let me just open up that get to the right page here. Here we go. Okay, 2 Kings chapter 4. In 2 Kings 4, in the end of 2 Kings 3, we just for a little bit of context, when the time of Yehoram ben Achav Melech Israel and Yehoshaphat Melech Yehuda, right, the two kings and the kingdoms that split, and they are being attacked by the king of Moab, Mesha, king of Moab, or he's rebelling against the king of Israel, and there's a battle, and this is how we meet. Meet Elisha. Right? Meet Elisha. Chapter 4, after we meet Elisha, chapter 4 zeroes in on Elisha himself and tells us some stories about him. I have a note here to come back to the end of chapter 3, where I'm highlighting on the screen right now something that happens with the king of Moab. I want to come back to that. If I forget, please someone remind me. I do have a note on it here. But we really start the Haftorah with what we call chapter 4, Isha Achat Min Shei B'nei HaNevi'im. So what I'm going to suggest is, and let me just do as follows. I'm going to put in the chat, if I can. Let me see if I can do something quickly. I'm going to stop the share for a second. I'm going to put in the chat a link to that page. It's on Sefaria. And right now it is 2:18 p.m. my time, I guess 7:18 a.m. For those of you who are in Eastern time. I'm going to suggest that we take, let's say, about 8 or 9 minutes to do the following. I'd like everybody to read that chapter. The way the Ashkenazim read it is actually there are different customs here, how far to read. But the way the Ashkenazim read it is from the beginning of the Haftorah, is from the beginning of that chapter, all the way until, I think it's until verse 37. Yeah, until verse 37. So it's about 37 verses. Ashkenazim, and I don't know if everyone's even familiar with the story. So I'd like you to do is in the next 9 minutes or so, 8 or 9 minutes, is to read the story in whatever language you would like, because that's the first thing to do. And as you're reading, if it's your first time reading it, then I think most of your brain and bandwidth is going to be focused on the story. What's it about, right? What's the story say? If you're a little more familiar with it, then you may have some capacity in terms of the bandwidth to be also having a split screen in your mind and thinking back towards Parashat Vayera. Remember the story, the angels come before Avram, and Sarai's there as well, and they greets them and gives them food and drink, and they announce the birth of a son, right? At some point in the future, maybe a year hence. Many other things happen in the Haftorah as well. Once that son named Isaac is born, it's a very rich parsha, but the parsha effectively ends with the story of the Akedah Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac, just reminding you, and then a little bit more, right? A little bit more at the end there, which is actually important, but not less so for our purposes today, which is Abraham is told that Milcah has also birthed children to his brother, and Bethuel. That's where Rivka comes into the story, the lineage. So that's the story of Vayera. So keep that in your mind if you're able to, as you are reading over the Haftorah for about 9 minutes, that story. And again, if you're able to keep a split screen in your mind as you're reading the story of Elisha here, think back towards the parsha. Right? Or do you notice any connections to the parsha? Okay. So we're going to do that for about 9 minutes or so, and we'll circle back then. Any questions as to what we're doing? Okay, so let's come back together. Anyone who's sort of here as a panelist, I guess much of attendees can do this, but anyone here on the screen, can someone just sort of summarize for us, which that's to say, like, interpret what is this Haftorah about? Right? So maybe we can just do the plot and summary for first. What happens in this Haftorah? Feel free to just unmute and jump in.
Elisha is performing a series of miracles. He starts out with causing the woman who's about to lose her children to a debtor. He causes her jug of oil to overflow so that she can fill jug after jug and then sell it.
Great.
And he is a visitor to Shunem, and another woman starts providing for him, giving him meals, and then she eventually sets up a room for him.
Mm-hmm.
And when he finds out that she hasn't had any children and she's got an elderly husband,
Right.
he makes arrangements that she will have a child. And then the child ends up in distress and had some kind of attack. He grabs his head and is screaming, my head, my head. And she takes him and puts him in the room that she had prepared for the prophet. The child is apparently dead. And then she and a servant run to go find the prophet and bring him back. He sends his helper ahead, who puts a staff across this dead boy, but he remains dead. And then Elisha gets on top of him, goes in the room, lays down on him, kisses him. I forget all the things he did.
Right, spreads out over him.
Child
Right.
comes back to life. And
just jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask about that staff. Is that staff from way back in the days of Moshe?
Well, I don't think it's meant literally to be literally to be the staff of Moshe, but maybe literally it's meant to evoke, the staff of Moses.
Okay.
It's a good question. Good observation. Yeah, exactly. As you say, right?
Staff that perform miracles like Moshe, right?
Right. So maybe it's meant to evoke it, right? Literally again, right? The prophet's staff, right? So yeah, indeed, right? And then he resurrects, right? He resurrects the child, and the notion of the resurrected son, is did not begin with Christianity. Is deeply rooted in biblical sources and Old Testament sources in the Tanakh. Okay, that's the basic of this Haftorah, right? He revives him. He says, "Take your child," and she comes in and falls at his feet, bows, takes her son, and goes. And there you go. That's the Haftorah. Okay, so it's a really interesting text, and again, it plays off of the story. This story of Elisha plays off of the story of Elijah, of Eliyahu, his teacher, in 1 Kings, I think around chapter 17. I'm not going to focus on that today so much, but that's its own study worth taking a look at. But it's very much analogous to a story there. What I want to focus on more today is the comparison to our Parashah, right? That's really our theme today. Not the study of the book of Kings per se, but the study of the Parashah and the relationship of the Parashah and the Haftorah. Let's just get right into that. Okay? Parsha to Haftorah. And in general, coming to this year, probably a good thing to review the Parsha before, and then, if you want to read the Haftorah before, also that'd be a good thing. We'll try to make some space here to do that as well. I have a whole list here, right, of similarities between the Haftorah and the Parsha, and then also, what I think is really important are differences between the Haftorah and the Parsha. Similarities, by virtue of the similarities and the parallels, you can notice the differences, right? You wouldn't think to put them into conversation otherwise, but the similarities can sort of highlight the differences as well. So let's start with similarities between the Parsha and the Haftorah. And let's start actually not with terminological parallels, but with like thematic parallels, like components of the plot, right? What are things that happen in the Parsha which seem to be echoed in the Haftorah? What do you guys have?
The main similarity.
Go ahead, Jennifer, first. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Okay.
Yep, go ahead, Jennifer.
Sorry, like a barren woman.
Okay, so first of all, you have barrenness, right? You have a barren woman in the beginning of the. You have a barren woman in the middle of Haftorah, right, by the Isha Hashunamit, where he says, "What should we do for you? You want us to speak to the king or something, right? Thank you for taking care of us." And she says, "No, I'm good." Right? Maybe she means something along the lines of like, "I'm a simple person, right? I don't need to Even though she's called a Isha Gedolah, an important woman, a wealthy woman, but I'm okay. So then he says, so again, Gechetzi says, but she doesn't have any son, and her husband is old. So that indeed, right, evokes in a way, or sounds a bit like Sarai, right? Sarai, that she's a woman, and her husband is old, as she says, right, herself, right? Oniza Cain, right? I'm old. My husband is old, and I'm also, on the older side, and she doesn't have a son. So the theme of barrenness, and Jennifer mentions the theme of the akara, right? A barren woman, but it's more than a barren woman. It's also, of course, what they call an annunciation, right? The announcement, this by some sort of, in the Parashah, it sounds like the angels, the three men. Here it's Elisha who says L'mo'ed hazeh. At this time, Ke'et Chaya, it's kind of a hard phrase to translate, but maybe it means like a year from now or something, you will be holding a child, which is very much parallel language to the beginning of Vayera, where they're told, where they're told, L'mo'ed hazeh, at this time, in about a year, right, you will have a child. Stephen writes in the chat, is it noteworthy that this story is immediately preceded by an instance of an Akedah child sacrifice? So actually, yeah, thanks, students. I actually wanted to notice that myself when I was preparing, and I said that before. The end of chapter 3 of Malachim has the Melech Moav taking this is the end of chapter 3 of 2 Kings, has him taking Beno HaBechor Shem Loch Tachtav Vayahilei Olah Al Choma, and offering him as an Olah, as a sacrifice. And then next thing you hear is our Haftorah. So I noticed that as well, and I wonder. It's not included in any Haftorah reading traditions that I know of, but certainly within the book itself of Kings, I think it brings child sacrifice and raising a child as an olah to the reader's consciousness, and then you perhaps encounter, I think, similar themes in the Haftorah itself. Martha, Minda, you have a hand raised, and Aviva has a hand. Go ahead.
Yes. So I'm asking a question where I am totally subjective. We are adoptive parents. And one of the things I've noticed in contemporary things, the idea that you can lean on the community to support your having a child. Now, Abraham and Sarah, at this point, she is still Sarai, or she's already Sarah?
She's still, at this point, beginning of the Parashah. Let me remember. Let me see what she's called at that point. Yeah, I think so. Go on.
Okay. So she is Sarai. Abraham's livelihood is under her.
She's called Sarai. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So in effect, wait a minute, get to where I'm asking you to go to. You will have a livelihood. You will be able to have a child because you can support the child, as is, you already have a wife to support. The other thing is, one of the things that we do not know about, and here again, I'm very subjective, is we don't know they don't have a child. We know they don't have a son.
Where? In which text?
Within the halachic text of Bereshit. Do we know for sure that there is no daughter?
Oh, interesting. I think that's a good question. There's never a daughter mentioned. I mean, I think Ben in this context probably means child. Just what it seems, but I guess
that's what the rabbis always tell us to believe.
Right, but I appreciate that. It's an evocative question. I don't know what to say. I don't know. I'm trying to think about.
I'm going to be studying with my chavruta in Jerusalem, and I'm going to ask her because her husband comes from the other side.
Okay. Who else? Aviva had something to say. No, you just, yeah, Aviva, go
yes. Well, several people mentioned barrenness, but it's the old age that in both cases, both the women and the men, the mothers and the fathers are very old. And I wonder about that because it's in the Bereshit Parashah, it ends with the continuation with the story of that Rivka will be born. So it's the covenantal promise that
Mhm.
Isaac will be saved, and then
Mhm.
Rivka. That's different. I don't think that's, the old age is similar. The covenant might not be. The other thing is, as was mentioned, were the miracles and hospitality. In both cases,
There you go.
Abraham and the Shunammite earned or contributed to this relationship with the angels and with Elisha with their hospitality. And
Very
one
good.
last observation I made is that the Haftorah is more detailed.
Mhm.
You know, the table, the bed, the chairs. Oh, and
Mhm.
a last but not least, in both cases, in the first, the angel, in the second, Elisha, save the son from near death. And
Great.
with the,
Excellent. So,
okay, so that's it.
great. So come to you. So excellent. That's all great. There's many things, right? But there's the hospitality, right? There's the achnasat orchim, and the way that precedes, if not contributes to, the announcing, the promising of a child, of a son. It's true. You mentioned to the covenant that Isaac is the heir to Yitzchak, is the heir to the covenant, while this son, Robert Alter points this out. Actually, this is like a dramatic announcement of a son, but he's anonymous, and we don't really know anything about him going forward, which is kind of intriguing and kind of curious. The hospitality, by the way, takes the form of food and drink, which is evoked in the language in the beginning of Vayera, and here at least lodging. And it reminds me of the midrash on Abraham that he planted in Eshel, which was an acronym for achila, shtia, and linan, meaning food, drink, and a place and lodging. So where did they get that from? Maybe in part they're getting it from, you know, what a full-fledged hospitality looks like, and you know, I guess in most cultures, but maybe also from these types of stories. Yeah, Liz, we'll take one or two more parallels, and then we'll start talking about differences and go from there. So, Elizabeth, what do you have?
I wanted to comment on the restoration. There are three separate restorations of children to their parents. In the first case, the poor woman whose husband was dead and had only the oil, her two kids were about to be sold to pay the debt, and she gets her children back. Of course, Abraham gets his son back at the Akedah, and then the Shunammite woman gets her son back. One thing that I find the most poignant thing to me in the Haftorah is when the Shunammite woman is crying out and says, you know, I never asked for this kid, and you gave me this kid, and now he's dead. And her grief at losing a child is so much greater than her grief at having never had one.
Mm.
You know, being barren, okay, she's come to terms with it, but losing a child is about the worst thing that can happen to a mother. And here, she hadn't been a mother, now she is, and then this has happened to her. And I found that extremely poignant.
Yeah, thank you. So let me try to sort of react to both of those points with regards to the connection between the Parashah and the Haftorah, or the connection is, you know, what they're saying to each other. We spoke about them as Chavruta last week. So first of all, with regards to the return of the son, return of the son. So you note very well that, you know, certainly the most explicit return or revival of the son is in the Isha Hashunamit's son, who is literally resurrected by Elisha. But you note well that this is preceded by a preceding return of a son, which is the children of the poor woman, one of the wives of one of the prophetic students, whose children are about to be taken by creditors, right? And then they are returned to her effectively. So literally, you have there the same, on the sort of like beneath the surface, the same idea of a son almost taken and then returned. So the Isha Shunamit's son is dies, is almost taken really, and is resurrected. The son of this poor wife of one of the Bnei Nevi'im, her children are almost taken, as it were, and then they're returned. And the son of Avram and Sarah, Yitzchak, is almost taken and then returned. And this notion of the son, the promise, especially the promised son, who is almost taken and then returned, appears in many ways throughout the Tanakh, as a big part of the story. Jon Levison has written a book called "The Death and Resurrection of the Beloved Son," and which I think is a really good book. And one of the things he does is try to pull out that basic dynamic from underneath many of the stories in the Bible. Think, for example, the story of Joseph, right? Joseph, who is in a way, the beloved son, who is, disappears, who Jacob thinks is dead, right? And then is brought back to him, right? Who then returns. And of course, this happens on the local individual level, but it's also happening for Israel in general. Israel is the B'ni Bechori, is the son who is almost banished and almost gone in many contexts, many metaphors, I should say, biblical metaphors, and then is returned. So that basic idea is very deep in the biblical dynamic, in the biblical sort of tool chest of metaphors and themes, the returning of the almost taken beloved son. And the truth is that with the Akedah itself, there is, if you read the story the way that I guess like the pshat of the story, if you will, it sounds like Isaac is almost sacrificed, right? Avram even picks up the knife, and then the angel calls out to him and says, "Don't strike this child." And Abraham doesn't strike the child. Isaac is never harmed. Al ta'aslam umad, don't do anything to him, and he's never harmed, and no blood is shed. But as you may know, there's a whole midrashic history and scholarly history to the idea, or investigation into the idea, that Isaac actually was killed and then was resurrected. So he was the son who was killed and then was resurrected. I'll just give you one example. Let me see if I can find this in my screen shares. Here it is. Is this it? Is that the right text? Let's see. Here we go. Can you guys see this? Resume share. There we go. Sorry, no, can people see my screen over here? No, it's not working. Okay, so I'll just read it to you from Pirkei Eliezer, which says that, I pull up the text over here. It's a midrashic text. Rabbi Yehuda said, "Kevan shehigia hachever cherev al tzavaro." Once the knife touched Isaac's throat, parcha v'yatsa nafsho shel Yitzchak. His soul fled, jumped away from Isaac. Kevan shehishmiya kolo min hakruvim. But when he heard his voice coming from between the kruvim, v'amar lo, I guess it's God's voice. V'amar lo, the angel, al tishlach yadcha, do not stretch out your hand, don't harm Isaac. Nafsho chazra legufo, his soul returned to his body, and Isaac stood on his feet. V'yada Yitzchak shekach hametim asidim lachayot. And Isaac knew and realized, this must be how in the future the dead will be resurrected. V'vatach v'amar baruch atah Hashem mechayei hametim. Blessed are you, God, who is mechayei metim, who revives the dead. And actually, tradition does associate that sechem bracha of the Amidah with Isaac. So there's a whole tradition of reading the story. I can't get into the whole thing right now, but a story of the Akedah as not only having a near-death experience for Isaac, but actually a death and then a resurrection. The Midrash talks about the ashes of Isaac, right? And many elements, which might be remnants of a notion that Isaac was actually killed and resurrected. Actually, Ibn Ezra, many have noticed that after the story of the Akedah, I have it here. Vayashav Avram al Na'arav. The end of the Akedah story has the end of chapter 2, chapter 19 of Reshit. Abraham returns to the Nevi'im waiting at the foot of the mountain, and they go together. So what do you mean Avram returns? Where's Isaac? So Ibn Ezra there says, it doesn't mention Isaac, Kihu bir shuto, because Isaac is, considered subsidiary or a dependent on Avram. When it says that Avram went down, it means that Avram and everybody with him went down, including Isaac. Maybe, but the whole text made a point in the beginning, keeps making a point of them going together up the mountain. It doesn't sort of assume that if Avram goes up, Isaac is with him as well. It makes a point of explicitly mentioning Isaac. So it's kind of odd. And actually, and it says, anyone who says otherwise, ha'omer, that no, the reason that Isaac is not mentioned at the end of the Akedah is because sheshachto v'azvo ve'acharka chaya. But anyone who says no, the reason Isaac is not mentioned is because Abraham slaughtered him and left him there, and then only later on was Isaac resurrected. Whoever says that's what Ibn Ezra has said the opposite of the intent of the scripture. Amar hefech hakatuv. Okay, so he knows the people who have that reading. He rejects that reading. Okay, but you see sometimes when people sort of try to censor or reject the reading, they end up preserving it. So you see just the preservation of that reading there. So and my point is that in the Kedah story as well, you may or may not have explicitly the idea of Isaac being killed and then resurrected, but you certainly have the idea of the near death, the very least, the almost taking away of the son. And this leads me to let me actually make a point there. When you have these parallels, this is a methodological point, a parallel between the Haftorah and the Parashah as such, right? So you can, and we note here sort of a similarity, but also a difference. In the Elisha story, the child is explicitly dead and then resurrected. In the Akedah, it's not explicit, right? As it is in that story. So you could go in one of two directions here, I think. You could argue that the Haftorah is noting the contrast, right? And it's almost like a what if on the Parsha. What if the beloved son, the announced son, actually was killed? What would that be like? What would happen then? Let's play that out in a different way in the Haftorah. That's one way of reading, I think, the relationship between the Parsha and the Haftorah. But another way of reading would be to think of Haftorah, I would call it kind of like an inner biblical midrash on the Akedah. And it's a way of saying, well, are you so sure that in the story of the Akedah, Isaac lived? Because here's a story which is very much analogous, and here the son explicitly is killed and resurrected. Go back to the Parsha, the story of the Akedah in Bereshit 22. See there, when you read it again, see if what you see there upon second glance and upon third glance. And maybe for all we know, this is part of the root of the midrash, or the reading, I should say, that sees the aforementioned reading that sees Isaac actually being killed in the Akedah and coming back to life, right? That's reading the story of Elisha back onto the Parsha and sort of inviting you to look more carefully. Be it as it may, either way, this motif of the announced son who will be then taken away and then ultimately returned is core to all these stories. The Haftorah clearly highlights that. The choice of the Haftorah here clearly highlights that, and at least the way the Ashkenazim read it. I think that's very, very important. I say the way the Ashkenazim read it because this is also, I think, is an interesting point methodologically. It's important to ask, when does the Haftorah start and when does it end? It's an excision. It's a selection out of the Book of Kings, a selection out of the entire book. Right? Stephen noted before that right before the selection, we have a child being offered as a sacrifice. So that wasn't put in. Interestingly, why not? Right. So let's note that. Let's also note on the tail end that in the Sephardic reading, according to what is indicated in my Chumash over here, the Sephardim end the story where the Shunammite woman is Isha Shunammite goes to find Isha Elohim, goes to find Elisha, and her husband says to her, "Why are you going off? Today is not Chodesh and not Shabbat. It's not Rosh Chodesh and not Shabbat." Apparently, Rosh Chodesh was considered such a day, and Shabbat as well, where you would visit, the holy person. And she says to him, "Shalom." She says to him, I guess, all is well. And that's where they end. That's where the Sephardim end their Haftorah. It's kind of interesting. They end it before she goes to Elisha and before the child is resurrected. And so what is that about? On a technical level, I'll just suggest that there is a notion of Haftorah being at least 21 verses, and it could be a quantitative thing, as to say that, this is, I think, 23 verses into the Haftorah, and you want to have at least 21, and you also want to end on a good note. Right? That's generally the Haftorah work. So this is the first kind of good note after 21 verses. So remember, a technical thing. But what ends up happening, whether that's the rationale, the effect is to highlight the sort of the beginning of the story, which is to say when the child is announced, and you sort of leave out the return part, the resurrection part. It's just something interesting, right? So much more the beginning of Parashah Vayera, unless the end of Parashah Vayera. But in the way the Ashkenazim read it, the child is actually resurrected. And I want to make another point, which is this is also coming up of what Elizabeth was noting, which is, and a few people here talked about this, like the relationship of Sarah to this whole experience. In the story of Elisha, in the Haftorah, the primary protagonist among the couple is the woman, to the extent that she's the one who is, who reaches the person, who is the one who initiates the hospitality, unlike in Parashah Vayera, where it's Abraham, who initiates it. She is the one to whom the child is promised. She is the one who knows that he's been taken. That's to say that he died. Actually, her husband says again, "What's going on? Why are you leaving?" And she just says, "No, I'm just going to teach Elohim, and I'll come back. Vashuva, don't worry about it. Shalom." He doesn't know anything about it. Contrast that with the story in our parsha of the Akedah, and it's the exact flip. Avram is the one who is issued the command. Avram is the one who carries forth the command. Avram and Yitzchak, Abram and Isaac are the ones who go towards to this mountain, Har Moriah, and the whole experience. We don't know anything about Sarah. We don't know if Sarah knows about this. Right? So there you have a glaring contrast, in my mind, between the Parsha and the Haftorah. Now, what do we make of that exactly? I think that's something I'd pose to you. Right? Once we notice that difference, what is the difference there? But it's clear that I'll say one thing that you do is that you get a chance to potentially read the pathos of the woman in the Elisha story onto Sarah. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. In the Elisha story, in the Haftorah, Elisha says to the woman, "Lamoed hazeh ka'it chaya at choveket ben." In 1 year from now, at a time like this, you will be at a good time, maybe you will be holding a son. But Tomer, and she says to him, "Al aduni ish Elohim." No, sir. Ish Elohim. Al tichazeh b'shivchatecha. Do not speak deceitfully to your maidservant. Don't tell me that. It reminds one of the experience of Sarah when Sarah laughs. Right? Batischak Sarah bekerba, playing off the name Isaac, she laughs. And maybe what she's laughing on in part, if you read it back over here, is she's saying, I don't want to be disappointed. I don't want to be deceived, right? With this promise. Now, in the story of Isha Shunamit, and David Silber has pointed this out as well, but I agree. I see it here as well. She's actually right to be concerned, because in a way she is deceived or disappointed because her son is taken from her. Now he is returned. So I mentioned here earlier, right? The pain of not having a child and the pain of having a child who was taken, God forbid, unfortunately. And here you can feel that she's explicit, right? Al techazeh, she's actually right to be concerned about being disappointed, deceived, because he's taken from her, then he's returned. But that's the dynamic, and maybe of the biblical dynamic of the son announced, taken, and then returned. And maybe Sarah, when she's laughing, we're meant to think to ourselves, part of her laughter, her disbelief, right, is part of it is this concern that it won't really happen in the sustained way in which you're implying, which is to say, I'll have a son and therefore an heir, and he will live. She knows somehow, right? Sarah somehow knows to be concerned that won't really happen. Not only that he won't be born, but that it won't be a sustained life. And indeed, he's almost taken from her. Okay? And when maybe we're invited to read the Haftorah and the experience of Isha Shunamit onto Sarah, as much as we're invited to contrast the absence of Sarah in the Akedah story to the prominent presence of the Isha Shunamit in the Haftorah. And I'll say one more point about that, and then either stop or pause, depending. But Elizabeth, I think your hand is still up, meaning I think it's a new hand, which is to say as follows. We mentioned it earlier, this idea of Haftorah as segue between Parsha and Parashah. So I was thinking about that again. I don't know if that always works, but here I was thinking about the following. Rashi on Parshat Chaye Sarah, which is, starts with about the life of Sarah as she died and the death of Sarah. That's the next parsha, and there's an interesting midrash cited by Rashi there. Rashi says, Abram comes to mourn for Sarah, and he says, Rashi, citing from Bereshit Rabbah, why was the parsha, the story of the death of Sarah, juxtaposed? Why does it immediately follow the story of Akedat Yitzchak? V'nismecha mitat Sarah laket Yitzchak, lefi she'al yedei b'sorat Akedah shenizdamein b'na l'shchita u'chamat shelo nishchat, because when she heard the news of the Akedah, that her son was almost slaughtered and then not slaughtered, or just escaping slaughtered, parcha nishmata mimena v'meta. Same phrase we had earlier about Isaac. Her soul jumped away from her, right? And she died. So Sarah dies there because of the pain, or somehow because of the experience of hearing about the death of the near death of her son, and that is why she dies. Might indeed our Haftorah act as a segue leading into this midrashic reading? That is to say, I don't mean that the midrash is a result of the Haftorah or vice versa, but somehow the introduction of the noticing of the juxtaposition of the death of Sarah with the Akedah, and the noticing and the asking by the midrashist, what was Sarah's experience in all of this, is partially answered in a way by the segue provided by the Haftorah in the persona of Isha Shunamit and her experience, Al Techazev, and her experience with the death, actually, of her son in the story of Elisha. So let me just pull out methodologically two things that we've done. One, in general, we've noted, and there's so many more things to note here in terms of the language between the Parsha and the Haftorah. Aterdati, now I know that you're a fear of God. Take a little bit of food and drink. Go onto the aliyah. By the way, she makes an aliyah, like an attic or a loft for the prophet, and I wonder if that's meant to evoke ha'alehu sham la'olah, right? The Akedah, right? And then that's where the son goes, right? They put him there in the high place, right? So I wonder if that's meant to evoke. There's many things to say about that point, about the commonality of language. But two methodological points, just to be really clear. One is we've noted similarities, and then importantly, I think, differences between the story of the Parsha and the Parsha and the Haftorah, and we've asked how they comment on each other. And partly in doing that, we've also noted methodologically and asked, where does the Haftorah begin and end, and raised that question and asked how that might, weigh in on or affect its meaning. Okay, let me pause there. Elizabeth, and I think there's new messages here in the chat I have to catch up on.
One other similarity that struck me is that these two formerly childless couples, Avram and Sarah, and then the Shunammite woman and her husband, when each of them take off with the donkeys, nobody tells their spouse where they're going. In the case of the Shunammite woman, her husband explicitly says, "What are you up to? Where are you going?" And she doesn't really tell him.
Right.
She doesn't say she's going to get the holy man because she wants to see what can be done about their dead kid.
She just says, "Shalom, it's all good."
Right. And then similarly, Abraham leaves to go perform the sacrifice without telling Sarah anything about it.
Yeah. So exactly. So that's like the data, right? That's what we notice in terms of the differences. And the question is, what do we do with that? Right? I think that's what's really interesting to me, at least. Right? Do we then sort of read back what the Shunammite woman says to her husband back into what Abraham didn't say or did say to Sarah? Or sort of invited to read it back onto there? Are we supposed to note the contrast that actually it doesn't say anything in Vayera, right? And that's a totally different. It's a good observation. Yeah. So I was just catching on some of the some things in the chat. Sharon asked. She noted that Elisha is responsible for so many miracles, and she doesn't remember that in the other parts of the Torah. Usually, think miracles are done by God or by angels. Reminds her of what's told about Jesus. So first of all, that latter point, the Jesus stories are built off of, in part, the Elijah and Elisha stories. So that's one thing to notice. They are taken from there. In terms of your first point, that usually it's done by God or by angels, and that's how it is in Parashah Vayera. I think that's also an interesting point. Mordechai Sabato has argued that this Haftorah is actually a critique of Elisha, or David Silber has called it, one of the themes of our Haftorah, or at least of its function in the Book of Kings, is about the education of the prophet. That Elisha doesn't understand exactly how this all works, and he tries to send a staff, and he'll do it sort of magically that way. And she's like, "You don't understand how this works. You have to come yourself, and you have to do it. You have to learn. You don't see it. You don't even see what's going on here. You don't realize I don't have a child." But Mordechai Sabato has also argued that this is a critique of Elisha, because Elisha keeps on, putting himself first in a primary role in terms of announcing, the child and the miracles, while in other places it's really God, who is the one who does so, and God is the one who, or the angels who are God's proxy, who return the son. So I think Sharon's a good point, and maybe there is a critique of Elisha here. I'm not sure, but that's certainly another difference to note once you notice the parallels, like Moses with the rock, right? Okay. Anybody else?
One other aspect of him learning is when the boy dies, he doesn't know about it.
Say more.
When the boy dies, he doesn't know about it. It says he had
himself. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And he says, "How's your husband? How's your son?" So in terms of him growing in the,
Totally. He doesn't know that she doesn't have a child at first, right? He tells him, right? And then he doesn't know she doesn't have a child. And then you're right. Then he says, God has withheld this from me. I didn't know that her son, something happened with her son. Yeah, that's totally true. Or maybe he's learning exactly that he doesn't see as well as they're called.
And one of the points that Silber makes in his patriarchs classes is when different people, including Abraham and Jacob, and when they don't take responsibility, when they don't own to their, when they say, "Oh, I didn't know," and I think in the I don't remember if it's in this parashah in Lech Lecha, but with Avimelech, when he says, "I had no idea, I didn't know," and he refers to that as a flaw.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to like Judah, who says that Kamimeni, right? When he realizes what he did with his
exactly
his daughter-in-law, he says, "You know what? I'm responsible. I was wrong." Right. Okay, that's good. Interesting. So that's throughout the whole book of Genesis, and then here it's maybe Elisha realizing his own limitations and trying to understand, what it is to be a prophet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody. That was fun. And I tried to highlight some methodological considerations as well, piggybacking on the content. And for next week,
about Rambam, what the Rambam had to say.
I didn't mention a Rambam, but I remember. I saw that in the chat. I remember Ibn Ezra and Rashi. I mentioned. Is that?
Yeah. No. Okay. I'll look it up at home.
No problem. I don't think I mentioned a Rambam.
No. I wanted to know. It's not that you mentioned it. I didn't hear anything, so I was wondering what he had to say.
Oh, you mean the Ramban? You mean Nachmanides?
No. Maimonides.
What he said about what?
What he said about the Haftorah.
I don't think he comments on the Haftorah on Maimonides.
Oh. Okay,
Okay, as far as I know.
okay.
We
Thank
don't
you.
have a commentary of Rambam on Tanakh or.
I thought because of Tchiyat HaMetim that there might be something, that's all.
It's possible that somewhere in his writings he does mention mention things like the prophets and miracles. He does talk about resurrection. That's true, but I don't know that he mentions our story. But if he does, let us know.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Homework assigned. Thank you.
There you go.
All right. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Kelsen, for a very interesting class and for everyone here for your participation. Hope that you have a wonderful day and be well. Look forward to learning with you again soon.